One would have thought that an American president who's just arrived at the Oval Office has far more on his hands and far more greater issues than to focus on a beleaguered, under siege strip that has just about emerged from a genocide the likes of which we haven't seen in modern times. Yet, Donald Trump did exactly that. He left everything, the trade wars with China, with Latin America over immigrants, with Canada, with Greenland, in order to focus his efforts on talking about the plight of Gaza Strip and its 2.2 million inhabitants, proposing that Gaza could be turned into a Riviera, that Gaza could become a playground for the rich, could become somewhere utilizing the spectacular weather and environment conditions in order to make somewhere somewhat of a resort that people flock to from around the world, forgetting the fact that these people have always lived there and belong there. Many of them refugees from nearby towns and cities throughout Palestine, but essentially they are of Gaza. And as proven over the course of a genocide that took 15 months in order to arrive at a ceasefire, as proven that those people, they are going to stay whatever it takes. The fact that we saw the scenes, the exodus, scenes spectacular of people walking back to their homes in the north of Gaza, are sufficient to allay any kind of suspicions that these people don't belong. In contrast to the fact that at the very first sign of threat or danger in Tel Aviv, and people will flock to Tel Aviv airport in order to depart. These scenes, who belongs and who doesn't? These scenes are what ought to tell the story of Palestine. But let's come back to Trump and to Gaza, and to his proposal that neighboring countries, including Jordan and Egypt, ought to take on the 2.2 million Gazans so that the whole strip can be vacated. The questions obviously are why, what are the drivers, to what end exactly, and why now, the timing. This came amid a meeting with wanted Benjamin Netanyahu. So the mere fact that Donald Trump actually stood next to Benjamin Netanyahu without enforcing the ICC warrant is in itself highly questionable from the legal perspective. But then they go on in a very cozy manner to talk so flippantly about this audacious, absolutely outrageous proposal to vacate Gaza from its inhabitants, from its residents, from its citizens, in order to create this so-called playground for the rich, as Trump commented and said. But there are several things that need to be taken into consideration. The first is the relationship between the Gazans, but generally speaking, the Palestinians with their homes. What Trump seems to have missed when looking at Palestine is that the Palestinians have already gone through promises such as these, that, as Marco Rubio, the Foreign Secretary, says, will be a temporary vacating of Gaza for people thereafter to return safely to their homes. The Palestinians know that lie quite well, and more than any other people around the world. In fact, they pay the price until this very day, until this very moment, of that lie being believed by their fathers and their forefathers in 1948, creating what is now known as the Palestinian Nakba. People were told, don't worry about it, you could just leave even your pots on the fire. You can leave your dinner tables with your dinner still in their plates. You can just leave because you're going to come back in a few hours, probably a couple of days, no more, no more. And yet now, 77 years on, they still search for that time when they will be able to return. So Trump misses the point. The Palestinians, they have been through this. They've experienced this. In fact, we saw even across the past many years since Gaza was under siege. We saw how when the Egyptians opened the Rafah border, the Gazans flooded, Al-Arish and beyond the crossing, spent an entire day enjoying themselves, walking the marketplaces, getting a flavor of what freedom to move is really like. But at the hour where the crossing was about to close, they all, and I mean all, every single one of them, came back home to Gaza. They will never leave Gaza. They will never ever leave Gaza. They are the only people known to man to run towards where threat is, where danger is, where devastation is. And we saw this time and time and time again. But also, the question is, do we believe Trump? Is this some sort of show? Is this some outrageous statement made by a narcissist, someone who suffers a deep mental illness? Or is this for real? And the question is then followed by, so even if this is serious, can it truly be implemented? And that's what we need to focus on. Because still, the ceasefire that we have till now is not done and dusted. Bear in mind, we're still in phase one. And many argue that the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, and now backed by Trump, will try to get as many of the hostages back, and particularly the American hostages held, before then going back to a state of war. Because Netanyahu's political face before the Israeli public is absolutely dismantled. It's destroyed. And he needs to regain some capital and some credit within his own. So there is still the high possibility, probably almost a probability, that Netanyahu will go back to war as soon as he feels that he has received the hostages that he wants, that he can show on Israeli TV to his audience and to the public. So could this be some sort of ploy? Could this be some sort of trick that the Israelis are now in cahoots with the Americans are playing in order to go back to the war on Gaza, whereby the original plot of vacating Gaza, of eliminating the Palestinians, in fact, eliminating any kind of life support, of infrastructure, civil or health or whatever it may be, in the Strip, in order to make the Strip uninhabitable. Is that a possibility? And I believe that that is definitely something that we need to look at. But also we need to understand that Trump, and as I said, the very first business of his, amid the outrage of renaming canals and bays, threatening countries around the world with a trade war, reclaiming or claiming territories that were never American to start off with, and yet leave all that aside to focus on a beleaguered Strip and a people just emerging, just about, from a genocide. That in itself is something that I believe we need to talk about. And the fact that the entire world, albeit that many, including the UK government, made some positive statements about international law, about how it would be illegal to drive out a population the size of the Gaza population out of their homes by force, and to house them in neighboring countries regardless of who those neighboring countries happen to be. The fact is that Trump is trampling on whatever remains of this thing that we call international law. Now we have entered a phase where people just don't care. It's not important anymore. Even the proclamations of the UK government, the German government and others, they were on the weak side, on the, well, no, that wouldn't be right. But someone should really call Trump and the US administration to task, because if this is allowed to pass, then the entire world is in disarray. The entire world is threatened with chaos. It's threatened with this being called by whomever wishes to whatever is in front of them. And that's something that we cannot withstand. We cannot see happen before our very eyes without acting. There needs to be an absolute change. Of course, bringing Trump into the Oval Office was the American people's decision. But this is going to bring, I would suggest, even damnation, not only to international law and the international institutions that we know of, but to America itself. Surely, the American public realizes how dangerous, how threatening, how absolutely absurd these proclamations are, and what kind of threat they bring back home. There needs to be something done, firstly in terms of helping Gaza rebuild itself, helping the Palestinian people to reclaim their rights, to assert the fact that not only was there a genocide in our midst, but that those perpetrators of that genocide and whoever assisted them will never get away with it. Also, Palestine needs to be on every international agenda. We need to now start talking not about rebuilding Gaza, but about lifting the siege upon Gaza. Every single Arab and Muslim country, at least if not every country in the entire world, should chip in and to try to recompense the people of Gaza for the devastation that they have been through. But ultimately speaking, we're talking here about all our safety, all our stability, all our lives. But the fact that Trump, Elon Musk and their ilk could so blazingly just do away with human rights, with justice, with international law, is something that we must all consider as being an existential threat to each and every one of us and all the institutions that we know around us. So, ultimately speaking, could this happen in today's world where the world entirely, absolutely, completely watched on as the Palestinians were being slaughtered? You could never tell. What was impossible just a few months ago is now very, very possible. And unfortunately, more and more, it appears that justice is always going to be on the side of the rich and of those who have power, political specifically. And we're seeing it now transpire in America, as well as other places around the world. Hopefully, the people's movements around the world will stem this, will counter this, will stand against this, and will stand not for what Trump represents. But we could never be sure. The Palestinians are in this for the long haul. We might have celebrated the ceasefire, but let's not make any mistake about thinking that this is somehow a resolution to the crises that the Palestinians have been suffering now for over 7 decades. This is a point in time where the world needs to stand for something, for a principle. Let that principle be justice, humanity, and human rights.